For me, as a writer and scholar, one thing is very clear. Before a single shot is fired, before a single grain of rice is confiscated, as happened in the Bengal famine, before a single package of aid is blocked, as is happening now in Gaza, there is a war of stories.
Hmm.
Okay. There is the empire for 500 years has constructed an enormous apparatus that turns the world on its head.
Welcome, Sunny Singh, to the Radical Futures podcast. Thank you so much for making the time from your very, very busy academic start of term.
Thank you
um,
for having me. So,
you're
yes.
welcome. Yeah. So you are a writer, academic, you've been a journalist, you've dabbled a bit in filmmaking as well. So you do lots of things, wear different hats. We'll get to some of them at least. But first, I want to congratulate you on your incredible, beautiful, short, minimalist story collection centering perspectives of women, if I can say that, called
Yes.
Refuge Stories of War and Love, in parentheses. And before that, you've written two books that are directly or indirectly about Bollywood. You are the co-founder of the Jhalak Prize, which was founded in 2016 in the UK for BAME writers, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, for those who don't
Mhm.
know. And I wanted to kind of start us there and unpack what I see as a sort of political approach that you take to literature and publishing. And I know you're a pretty fierce advocate for Palestine and other important causes. And we have seen in the past couple of years the ways in which writing, publishing, prizes, and culture broadly has become a sort of battleground. We're entering a third year of an ongoing genocide in Palestine, wars without end in
Mhm.
Sudan, Congo, Ukraine, and then, of course, the rise of fascism everywhere. So I wanted to start by bringing all your expertise under one umbrella and say, where does literature come in?
Wow, that was quite an intro. But yes, you're right on all of those accounts. Um, Having said that, I think for me, all of the things you have said about me and all the things I do are really part of the same project.
Hmm.
And the reason I say this, my work as an academic, as a writer, as the founder and director of the Jhalak Prize, as an advocate for justice, all of these are central or they center around, perhaps is a better way to explain it, one core idea.
Mm.
And that is I was born in what is a political former colony of Britain. And I was born in a world that is a post colonial world, which is not only about the colonization of many lands and across the planet by initially Western Europe and then wide across to its settler colonies, but it's also an ongoing colonial project. So the wars, the genocides, what we're watching now are still the same colonial wars.
Yeah.
For me, everything I do centers around finding ways to undo that empire. For me, as a writer and scholar, one thing is very clear. Before a single shot is fired, before a single grain of rice is confiscated, as happened in the Bengal famine, before a single package of aid is blocked, as is happening now in Gaza, there is a war of stories.
Hmm.
Okay. there is the empire for 500 years has constructed an enormous apparatus that turns the world on its head. The
Absolutely.
Palestinian writer Murid Barghouti once said, all you have to do to shift the world is to start a story with secondly. You don't start with the arrival of the colonizer on the
Absolutely.
shores of what we call America. We start with the great pioneers. We start with the fact these wonderful people who just randomly sailed across the sea, arrived in a land that's not theirs, decided to start taking it over, and the people resisted.
Hmm.
In that story, the
Yeah.
indigenous people of that land become the villains.
Hmm.
And the empire has a lot of resources, it has an enormous amount of power.
Yeah.
So the only thing for me as a writer that I can do is to write back to that, to refuse those stories. And as a scholar and a teacher and an academic, what I can do is to teach as many people as I can that
Hmm.
their stories are important, not just because somehow they have to speak, but the fact that our stories make a difference to the world we live in and the world we can build.
Hmm.
So when you say, why does it matter? That's your answer.
Yeah. Okay. So to come to kind of synthesize what I'm hearing is you saying that literature for you is a mode in which anti colonial, historically contextual, anti empire type of storytelling takes place because empire has enormous resources to build the narratives within which we are enmeshed, which we are constantly fighting back, writing back to, and so on. So I think what I'm thinking as we are in the third year of this, particularly with what's happening in Palestine, is this extreme despair. And I think the despair is to do with speed, is to do with um, why how can it take that long, how can everything be slowed down? On the one hand, we are being told everything is happening very fast, we're getting all these images minute by minute, documentation, evidence, all that, even these reports that have come in, from the UN
Mhm,
and so on. Even that, actually, it's actually faster than we've ever known. Yet, you know
mhm.
saving, helping, aid, stopping the killing, all of that seems feels almost feels it's too slow. It's it's not happening, actually.
Okay.
So I think this is where I'm coming from, and within that,
Mhm,
I'm talking about the slowness of literature. I'm talking about the writing of the book, the publishing of the book, the readership of the book, the book, gaining something in certain circles, not gaining something in other circles. I'm talking about that long game of literature. And I think you know something about that game because you did start this particular prize with particular intentions. And yeah, so I think when I talk about hopelessness, despair, I'm talking about the question of speed, and very much within that, what use is literature? By literature, again, books, publishing, prizes, culture work, culture activism. So anyway, however you want to.
You know, I'm a first generation migrant in Britain. I moved here in 2005. For about 10 years, I was watching this play out constantly. All white juries, all white long lists, all white XYZ. And down to us, there aren't enough black and brown writers. There are not enough black and brown writers qualified enough to serve on juries, our great prize juries. They're not great writers who are sending us enough material to agents. I have heard every excuse in the book.
I know.
I went back to something that my grandmother said to me when we were growing up. My grandmother used to say, if you see something wrong, fix it.
Hmm.
The Jhalak Prize is named after the same grandmother
Hmm.
because I saw something wrong. And I'm told, no,
Yeah.
fix it.
And how did it go, the
So the
process
Jhalak
of making
Prize,
it?
let's not even go there.
Oh, really?
With, I mean, we're going into our 10th year. It'll be 10th anniversary in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
We have fought tooth and nail to even survive from day one. We had Equalities Commission accuse us of racism, thanks to an MP who is
What?
now a former MP in the very first year. We have had, absurd, the legacy press in this country has talked about how we are a prize that rewards skin color rather than literary merit. We have had, most press outlets in this country won't cover the Jhalak Prize. It's a very standard thing. Here's we have great partnerships with amazing people, but
Mm-hmm.
we probably have the smallest funding of any prize in this country.
Yeah.
We are an entirely volunteer run project.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Nobody gets paid. Why? Because when you're doing work that is going to shake up the empire, they're not going to fund you.
Yeah.
We don't get diversity funding because we're not a diversity project.
My God.
They
And the
hate us,
racism,
and that's
this is
fine.
this is the other racism you got accused of, the
Yeah.
racism towards a majority
Oh,
population.
yeah. I mean, and the thing is, here's the thing. After 10 years, I work off the principle that the wider apparatus can't stand us. They
Yeah.
barely tolerate us. They have to deal with us because it maybe make us look good. We are needed in some ways for them to be able to point that they're the good people. We are needed to kind of give cover to the imperial narratives. We are all kind of forced to be complicit. Every time I publish, I know I'm being made complicit. I am the controlled opposition, right? I'm allowed to exist as controlled opposition for the empire.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no sort of illusions about this. We can make a difference because each time a kid reads a story. Now, I'm going to give you a statistic we don't often talk about almost now 40%, but 35, 30, so we're talking about one kid out of every three in a school in Wales or England. That child is from a minority ethnic background. Every time that child reads a book that features someone like them, that features their family, that features their story, that's one kid who's had a little chink out of that imperial propaganda worldview knocked out. That's a child who's had one tiny taste of freedom. So Jalak Prize exists, the Jalak, or every Jalak project exists, not so we can somehow get kudos from the publishing industry. It's to ensure that readers, especially those of the future, citizens of the world, not just of this country, grow up with the possibility of freedom, not just in a physical, geographical, cultural, social, economic ways, but freedom of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
always go back to the Tagore poem about where the head is held high and the mind is free. That's what we're working for. So that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Congrats on coming up to 10 years. That sounds like an incredible journey. And I was thinking as you were speaking about, there is such a fuss about a fact that something has changed. And I think, for example, the Booker, which is the most known, all the money, all the coverage you can ever imagine, the pomp, pageantry ceremony, all of that. Um, them doing the translators prize and finding whatever, diverse people to reward and things like that. I have been thinking perhaps this does signal some sort of a tangible shift. Of course, these are not possible without all the other warriors such as yourself and all the other people within the culture work industry working really hard to bring it all, to harness all that sort of resistant energy. But I felt like we are safely within a space that some change has been recorded. But when you say that, I think I'm wrong. I know there's lots of work to do, lots of strides to make, but I'm surprised actually to hear just how awful this sounds, and that
No,
this is
no,
not good.
I think when we start to make change rather than talk about change,
Yeah.
this is from Sarah Ahmed. So I'm paraphrasing her idea. When you start really getting down to the work, the structure will oppose you.
Hmm.
Obviously,
Yeah.
it's about showing. It's about continuing to talk about diversity. It's about continuing to talk about inclusion, talk about change, but ensuring that nothing changes. The more
Exactly.
you can talk about it,
Yeah.
the more you don't have to change. And
Yeah.
that is why the moment, and I have a great deal of love for writers who are, many of the writers who are obviously honored and
Sure.
celebrated by huge prizes, by huge um, publicity, because each one of them is important in
Hmm.
in telling different stories.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in individuals.
Yeah.
I'm interested in structural shifts.
Hmm.
A lot of I have very dear friends who are on the Booker International lists and various translation prizes and other prizes. And it's not as if I hold that against them. It's I celebrate with them. I'm joyful for them. I love the fact that they are recognized because they are. Let's be clear. I mean, they have to work
I know.
100 times harder to
Yeah.
get there
Absolutely.
than
Absolutely.
somebody who is embedded in the empire.
Hmm.
I completely and absolutely love that we get there.
Hmm.
The issue is not individuals, it's the structure. I'm interested in knocking down the structure. I'm interested in pulling it down and rebuilding something that is more equitable. And
Yeah.
unless that's the part we tend to forget, we are given these little milksops and told, oh, but look, it's nice. Yeah, that's not enough. I
Absolutely.
don't want the bottom, the last chair at the table. I want the whole damn table for all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you. I'm going to come to you, the individual, and we're going to start with your Bollywood obsession.
Hmm.
You've written a book about Amitabh Bachchan before,
Hmm.
the great
Yes.
Amitabh Bachchan, and then 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, Bollywood State of Mind was published, and for those of us who, for those listeners who have not read the book, maybe just tell us why Bollywood, what's this obsession, why is your story and the story of Bollywood connected?
It's a really great question. But I think, again, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's
Hmm.
about the stories we tell, the stories we consume.
Hmm.
And I grew up in India. I was born in India. Um, in the 1970s, the walls, all the street, along the street, there would be these big hoardings, these hand painted hoardings, these big posters. There were songs that would play. I mean, this was our major cultural
Yeah.
consumption, right? I mean, and we didn't choose. So we would go and, I grew up in Banaras, so we would go to like the Shankar Institute and watch classical concerts that went all night. But, and we looked at art and we did all of that. But alongside,
Hmm.
we didn't separate it into high and sort of popular culture. It was only as I grew up, and the first time when I moved to New York as a 16-year-old with my father, who was posted there, was when I realized that there was a problem. And the problem was that was the first time I learned that, oh, an industry that is nearly as old, and I'm not just talking about Bollywood and Hindi cinema and Hindustani cinema, I'm talking Indian filmmaking, as the rest, as the rest of the world. Cinema as a technology arrived in India 6 months after it was, introduced to the world in Paris.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, at a room, if I wrote it in a novel, people would laugh. They'd say it's a little overdone. The room where the Lumiere brothers presented the technology was Salon de Inde. It was the India room.
Wow.
Talk about shadowing, right? And the technology arrived 6 months later on our shores, and Indians picked up movie making almost instantly. So I remember as a teenager going, wait, how is it that our films are silly? Our films are naive. The entire discourse around it is this is escapist fare for impoverished masses who are too stupid to know what's happening. And then I would go into, of course, in New York, and go into things like Ghostbusters and say, how is this working out for you? And
Yeah.
I think so very early on, I started to question the issues of narrative. I was fortunate. I went to a university. All my education was by people who demanded that I think. And when I started my PhD, I kind of reverted back many years later. I wanted to write about Indian cinema. And
Hmm.
the reason I wanted to write specifically about Indian commercial cinema, not just Hindustani, although obviously Hindi is my first language, Hindustani is my first language, so it was easier for me to focus on that. Um, was to because I realized that there was a problem. The people often writing academically about Bollywood or Hindustani cinema weren't particularly fond of it. They would even when they were in India or in the diaspora, they would take this kind of very academic view, very
Sure.
objective, neutral. And it's a kind of demand that is never made of, for example, a Hollywood scholar or a French or Italian cinema scholar. You are never demanded that you must place yourself outside and be sort of superior to this product that you're writing about.
Mm.
You can be an absolute Hollywood fan. I have some really great colleagues who are absolute brilliant Hollywood fans. They write on, Spielberg and Sinatra and so on. They're never asked, you know, do you really like this? And do you really watch it? Aren't you a little bit embarrassed by it?
Hmm.
So I think that was an emotional core to it. And when I did my PhD, it really opened up a world that I hadn't quite recognized. The archival work, not just with cinema. I'm interested in how stories work, not just
Yeah.
in terms of how they're created, but how they impact people and
Hmm.
how they impact culture. And so I was very, very intrigued to see how from day one, but that's how Palke, there's a kind of anti-colonial impulse
Okay.
in the cinema. And I kept, I did my PhD. I then came back. I wanted to think about how culture and cinema interact and stardom interact. So I did the Amitabh Bachchan book. And then I went back to rethinking about how we need to write a cultural history of India
Yeah.
and how culture, cinema, theater, all of these have produced the country we are today. And that's where a Bollywood state of mind came from. It kicks off with the changes in theater practices in the 1850s and ends in with the release of Pathan
Yeah.
in 2022. So it's a kind of a very large canvas, but I wanted a book that somebody who wasn't an academic, who wasn't a sort of, oh, I need a big.
Sure.
I wanted people who just love cinema to be able to pick it up and read it alongside what they would read about Fellini or,
Yeah. Yeah.
or Hollywood or Korean cinema, whatever. They could just, somebody who loves cinema can read it and say, hey, this makes sense.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah,
interesting.
sure. Um, the book is of course nostalgic. It's beautiful. It talks about so many incidents from your childhood, your parents, their relationship, the places you moved, and ties films alongside. And it's really kind of masterful at the level of all the genres that you have infused. I just wonder what happens with what India is. So, I have a competing co-written academic book that nobody's going to read, so no worries. But the critique of that is the critique within that is this
Hmm.
Indian imperial formation. India's imperial
Yeah.
formation is the name of the book, and the instrumentalization of this
Hmm.
nationalism. Yes, it's anti-colonial,
It
but
was, let's be clear,
it
it was
was. It
anti-colonial.
was anti-colonial.
I think there is a streak of it still that retains a kind of political
Sure.
engagement and anti-coloniality at its core. But when you cover a span of history, let's not pretend that cinema produced in the 1920s or 1940s, 1960s, 70s, 80s is the same as the one produced
Absolutely.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm just, with all this stuff now, with the way in which India, the direction it's going in, the way in which Modi is instrumentalizing Bollywood, all the people that are bending the knee to him from Bollywood, it's a very disturbing moment, in time at this time. And, there is a part of me that, in a way, knows what I'm going to see if I click
Hmm.
on a certain Bollywood movie. I have a lot of problems with Pathan and RRR, for example.
We
But
should.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and but then of course the nostalgia that you speak of, having grown up in
Hmm.
India, understanding it intrinsically, how these
Hmm.
movies are, where it will lead me to, where the tears will come, what it will teach me, is still will lead me to click on it. And most recently I clicked on an airplane on a film called Fighter, and it was with Deepika Padukone and Hrithik Roshan,
Oh
both people
God,
I find
that was grim.
extraordinarily
That
hot.
was grim. It
But
was
it is
grim.
so anti-Kashmir, it is so anti-Muslim, to the point that I started to feel almost like
I
it's
want
just,
to see. Yeah.
so anyway, I just wonder how you feel about all these ambivalences, that in all of us. I'm sure you have
I
feelings.
think. I think. Look. I think one of the things, as a scholar and a thinker, it's important that we. It is possible to love something and critique it at the same time.
Sure.
And that applies to movies, that applies to people we love, and it applies to countries that we love and belong to. These are not separate things.
Hmm.
These are not, we should be able to say, look, that is really not a good way forward. I mean, we would do that to friends of ours, right? So why shouldn't we take that to the next stage?
Hmm.
When it comes to culture, we should be very critical of what we consume. And if you look through a Bollywood state of mind, it isn't a great ode. It isn't all praise for the cinema. It
Hmm.
is very clear that there's lots of other complications happening. It talks about, in fact, there is a section which specifically talks about one of the places I grew up was in Arunachal, and I went to school there. And I talk about that, the use of those wonderful beloved songs from the 50s that we
Yeah.
sang in the school assembly. And it took a long time as an adult to realize that that was a
Totally.
form of propaganda and propagandization, a kind of a brainwashing that
Hmm.
was happening across a kind of, a hegemonic narrative that was being spread. I'm not saying that there are not political reasons behind it that I can understand and I recognize. I'm just saying that we should not assume that we just because we love a movie industry or a particular film we cannot dispute
Yeah.
it. I want to go back to not just Fighter, but there's a whole range of these. I mean, it's I have a paper that I will eventually get to on precisely the use of mythical cinemas and the kind of this
Mm,
idea that it goes back to the 1930s and the 20s with these kind of you know dogmic films, but in this case now it's a redoing of mythical stories, but also historical cinema, which is actually period cinema or costume drama,
mm,
and really a kind of myth making with a very clear political agenda at the heart of it, which is required. And this is important that we think about it. When you think about sort of status quo or, kind of thinking about hegemonic narratives, at the heart of it is a form of hyper aesthetic. And so when you see kind of, Hrithik Roshan all buffed up and oiled in various states of undress,
it's obvious.
that is on purpose, right?
Of course.
I mean, if you go back and you think about, for example, let's shift our lens a little bit. It is not a surprise that a book and movie franchise that packaged uh, sort of liberal forms of racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, a kind of a Blairite vision of Britain, supposedly, which makes it liberal, and we know it's not, was the largest British product and export to the world from the 1990s on. So the last 30 years, think
Hmm.
about that franchise, right? The Wizards franchise.
Yeah.
Why does what? But think also of the aesthetics. Think of the emotive quantities. Kids picked it up worldwide. That wasn't because they were looking for stories about British private schools with
Sure.
magic thrown in. That was because of the machinery. But it was also because of the aesthetics, not only of the books, but when it was transported into this magical movie franchise, right?
Hmm.
What we're watching, what in many ways, what Indian cinema, and it's not just Bombay, it's across I mean, some of the industries from the South are pushing that envelope even farther, and not all industries, but specific sections of it. Um, it is very much rooted in this hyper masculine aesthetic, this kind of a
Hmm.
mythologized version. At the heart of it is sexism, casteism, Islamophobia, a kind of disdain for the power of the average person, this
Absolutely.
contempt for the poor, this contempt. I mean, so there is a kind of process of constructing this.
Hmm.
And we should be able to criticize that. We should be able to see that as
Hmm.
dangerous and damaging. But
Yeah.
I also want to go kind of loop back to what you said about your own book and why I talk about a political independence in 1947
Hmm.
and why we are still living in a post colonial era. Every single nation state on this planet in 2025 is a post colonial state. It is a Westphalian state. It's a state, even if we are supposedly independent, that has been created by the colonizer.
Yeah.
And so the ways each of these nation states functions is basically built into the DNA. The empire is built into the nation state's DNA. Right?
Absolutely.
I said this. I say this on a regular basis. In 1947, the colonizer gave us the boundaries. They drew the line through the land, and you can argue that that was the only way they wouldn't leave. Okay, what about on 16th August 1947? Why didn't we just turn around and say, okay, yeah, you know what? Now that you're gone, get rid
Yeah.
of these boundaries. These were choices made by people who benefit, and not just individuals, because I'm not interested in, oh no, they were going to demonize Nehru and Gandhi and not the other, and idolize the others. These boundaries were benefited structures, benefited established elite, and they went with it.
Yeah.
Now, so to me, anti-colonial activity is to also remind people that every state, as of now, is an imperial state,
Absolutely.
and we
Absolutely.
need to undo that, and
Mhm.
that's going to take its own time.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be running out of time, so I wanted to amplify your beautiful news story collection, Refuge Stories of War and Love. And it just came out. And I just want you to tell us a little bit about this book. You write in the preface that it has taken you many years, that it's been with you for many years. And I, as with my literary critic hat on, would say stylistically extremely different. I would say the Bollywood book, for example, that came very recently, it's maximalist, and this is minimalist. There's a very clear minimalist thread. And I just wanted to just tell us a little bit how it all happened.
So if the a Bollywood state of mind was Manmohan Desai, this is possibly Satyajit Ray. Is that what you're saying to me?
Even the covers. Maximalist, minimalist. So
Yeah.
tell me how
Funnily
you.
enough, yeah, the same publisher though. So it's always good to know that. So Refuge for me, I've been working on this book for I think most of my life. The first draft of one of the stories I tried writing when I was 16 years old, and obviously didn't get very far with it. But in real terms, I've been working on it for 25 years, which is kind of strange for a small book. But it's a book about 100 years of armed conflict. The oldest story is First World War. That's its setting in France. That's also the first time South Asian soldiers traveled to Europe en masse. And it's a real pivotal moment because the empire has been very controlling of how white people and Western people are seen in its colonies. And when these vast numbers of men come to Europe, they're deployed and not, it's harder to control how they are interacting with populations. There's a switch. There's a kind of, the empire stops being this incredibly powerful. They realize that these are people like just human. So, and this last story, or the most recent story, is set, even though it's not chronologically in the book, is set in the Syrian refugee crisis.
Yeah.
My point around these stories was to think about how humans endure. And I think it is possibly my most explicitly political connection. It's anti-colonial, it's feminist, it's anti-war. Um, the genesis, I suppose, is because I'm a Fauji brat. My father was in army. I grew up in in cantonment towns. Um, and my first memories are from 1971. And, in this process of, there is this mythology that is pushed by governments because you have to give people something if you're going to send them off to go die and kill about the great hero. But
Yeah.
as a child, I remember seeing my father go off to war with his troops and fellow officers, and not a lot of them, and many who didn't come back. And this idea of how is it that you're supposed to, and the world celebrates, the country celebrates that there is all these, huge pronouncements and parades, and nobody stops to say what happened to that person who didn't come back, what happened to the family of the person who disappeared, what happened to the person whose land these wars were fought in. Because we have stopped thinking about wars. We have this idea of war, there's a battlefield and two armies meet, but and there's nobody there other than these people fighting. But
Sure.
was that ever true? you know for 500 years we live in a world of colonial wars where think about India. You had French, the Portuguese, the Spanish kind of going through. This is 17th century. They talk about these wars. They were fighting the French and the English fighting in India against each other on what happens to people who are just trying to get through their lives, right? They want to till their fields, they want to take care of their kids, and suddenly these armies on their lands, right?
Beautiful.
I don't go that far. I look at the last 100 years, but for me, it is important, and it is part of that anti-colonial thinking that we push back against imperial narratives in every which way. Part of it is to think about how really, when war is forced upon most of the world's population,
Absolutely.
how do we resist? And that resistance is caring for each other. It's about loving each other. It's also about loving ideals and fighting for them. So really, that's what these stories were about.
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful note to end on. And I hope everybody's going to pick up all your books. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining me.